Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about...
I'm curious about building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about...
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
We go to the movies, we go to brunch, we talk politics, and we have sex. I mean, as somebody who identifies as pansexual, who really is attracted to the person and not the gender identity, I often will think, like, at some point within my friendships, will be like, yeah, I could do that. That could happen. That could happen for me right there.
Yeah. Hi, welcome to the Curious Fox podcast. This podcast is for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name's Effy Blue.
And I'm Jacqueline Misla, and on today's episode, Effy and I are going to be talking about friends with benefits. How can you engage more emotionally or physically with a friend without damaging the relationship?
Before we dive in, though, we should note that we made it to the other side of the U.S. elections. Well, kind of, from what it sounds like. Normally on this podcast, we don't talk about politics, but it's kind of hard to ignore the elephant in the room. Or should I say, the donkey in the room.
Yes. There's sure to be a number of lawsuits from the current administration in the coming months, but it seems like the U.S. will have a new president.
Yay!
Yeah. Upon hearing the news, the streets of New York and cities across the country erupted into a huge party.
And around the world, frankly.
Yeah. It was like, it happened on a Saturday, so it was like gigantic brunch. That's what it felt like. Like everyone was just out. It was beautiful weather here on the East Coast, and everyone was just like outside and celebrating until the wee hours of the night. Yeah.
I saw all the videos. It was definitely, as I said, I think it was a worldwide celebration, to be honest. I don't really know any other country that were like, yay, Trump is the best president. I think everyone was like sigh of relief to have that guy out of the room. But let's not give him any more time or airtime because he's soon to be out of our life. What I do want to talk about, the thing that I'm most excited about, is the VP-elect, Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
She is so many firsts. She's the first woman, first Black vice president, first Black woman vice president, first South Asian American, first South Asian American woman, first VP whose parents came from India and Jamaica, first VP who counts Prince and Bootsy and hip hop among her musical loves, first VP who's a stepmom, which is huge. First VP to be a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, and also a first grad HBCU grad, and first vice president married to a man.
It's true. There's conversation now around what he will be referred to, because generally it's the first and second lady are the spouses of the male elects. And so they don't know if he's going to be the second gentleman or the second man, nice. Or they don't know what. So that's a bit of conversation.
I love that. Yeah. Figure it out, people. Yeah. Figure it out.
Exactly. You have to create new nerves. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think people are really excited about what having a woman of color in this role will mean for our country. And she's faced questions, honestly, about her criminal record, or rather her record on criminal justice issues, specifically the fact that people feel like she is not a progressive reformer, but is emblematic of like the tough on crime criminalization of poor people of color, particularly when she served in California. And, there's been some controversy around like contradictions, I would say, in her record. So her stance on employment versus incarceration, or the death penalty, or investigating and prosecuting police shootings. And so some folks say that there's contradiction there that we should be looking at. Other people say that it's actually just more of a balancing act, that because she is a Black Indian American woman, that she has stood out and that she had to face more scrutiny and criticism. Perhaps actually that she was trying to reject the narrative of how Black people are seen as being anti-law enforcement, or how women are seen as not being tough in politics. And so it was important for her to show up as more balanced in order to counteract that narrative. So, it's going to be important to see how she shows up in this role. That said, I think that often women have to make calculations and accommodations to be successful in their careers, particularly in politics.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's having to find sweet spots all the time. Are you too tough? If you're too tough, then, you're a bitch. If you're not tough enough, you're a pushover. And we don't really have those narratives about men in power. But for women, it's just have to, like you said, is a constant balancing act. And it's not only your resume, but you also have to look good. And you also have to have, your kids have to be perfect. And, all these things that are all layered on top of each other. You can't just do your job. You have to be perfect in every other way. And I think we had the similar situation with Hillary. People just the narrative of people just saying, I just don't like her, I don't know why. Like, I don't know how many people I've heard say, I don't like her, I just don't know why. And I think it's because she just she didn't fit into the stereotype of stereotypical women ideals. And I think people struggle with that. I think just seeing her in power, in charge, knowing what she's doing. Look, she's by no means, neither Kamala nor Hillary are perfect humans. First and foremost, they're politicians. Let's just remember that they're politicians. And I think they're not perfect people. I just still, regardless, though, they are held up to a much higher scrutiny. And also they are then become the sort of the archetype for their gender or their race. Like they represent anybody and everybody, and anything they do, it reflects back onto all women are like this, or Black women are like this. So it's a tightrope.
Right, having to face representation, but also the stereotype based on that representation. I remember watching a documentary recently that was talking about Michelle Obama when the Obamas were first campaigning for the presidential role, and that she was played back a clip of her doing one of the speeches in one of the states without the audio on, and was able just to watch the fact that it looked like she was angry and yelling. And of course, she was passionate and she was delivering a speech based on something that really mattered to her, but without any feedback, she understood automatically that she had to stop looking like the angry Black woman. And immediately after that, all of her speeches would smile when she spoke more, would take breaths and pause more. Like, it informed the way she showed up because she understood the narrative that was dictating how people would perceive her. And this is Michelle Obama, who, kind of globally people really have a positive relationship with. And even her, she had to be reflective about that. And I think one of the pieces of feedback that I've heard recently is that people were happy that apart from Kamala's Converse sneakers, that there really wasn't a lot of discussion around what she was wearing. And that feels like some sense of progress, because certainly that's not a conversation that people are having about what men are wearing.
No, I mean, that's always the thing, even at the Oscars, right? It's always like, who are you wearing? What are you looking like? Women get a very different set of questions than men do. And same with, we have this with AOC, she gets bonus points for being good looking, and, and which sometimes overshadows what she's capable of, which is, she's brilliant. She works really hard. So I think these things, I mean, it is undoubted that, of course, we're women and we would say this, but I think objectively, women just have to work harder. Yeah. And they have to deliver more, and they have to walk a much narrow line of, not too pushy, but not too much of a pushover, not too pretty, but not ugly either. Don't look too good, but also don't look like a slut. Like, it's such a fine line that you have to walk.
You're either matronly or you're slutty. It's true. Exactly. I don't know if you had heard this. This was about 2 years ago. When the first sole female Japanese prime minister was appointed. It was in 2018, and she immediately faced gender-based bias. Right. So they had a declaration ceremony to mark the new government. And right beforehand, she was informed that she was not dressed correctly because the Imperial Palace dress code stipulates that women must wear long dresses. And so right before the ceremony, as all of the male electeds were relaxing and talking with, fellow parliament members, she had to rush out and go find a gown to wear to essentially the inauguration or the declaration ceremony that would put her as, the first Japanese prime minister. So It's crazy. I mean, we
Yeah,
are
it's
just,
hard.
there's just wild underrepresentation in government as a whole. I know there was a recent study with the World Economic Forum that out of 146 nations, 56 of them, so it's 38%, had a female head of government or state for at least 1 year in the past half century.
Mhm.
So out of 56, 31 countries had a female over the last 50 years for 5 years or less. 10 of those nations for a year, they had a woman. And 13 of those countries had a woman in leadership for less than a year. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's also, yes. And we know through COVID, the countries with female leads have handled COVID virus much better. There's research that says it's that those with female leaders were more organized. They have less deaths. They handled a much smoother between transitions. So there is data that says female head of states do better, especially in crisis.
Yes.
But here we are.
Yeah. And it's not just, this is not a women are better than men argument. It's that in those cases, women had more consensus building and buy-in. So they brought more people to the table and were able to have better advisors around them and didn't feel the need to make all the decisions on their own, which then allowed, because of that sense of community, then they were able to then have the right information, make the right decisions. So this is not about that women are inherently more intelligent than men, though I'm sure that could be a soapbox moment. We can have that conversation. But it's not about that. It's actually just about the way in which, people are doing the work. And so it all comes back to the fact that we need more representation, that you started by saying that, what got you excited was about the first in this particular election here in the United States. And so I want to stay in that spirit and say, there's still a lot of work to be done. Let's take a breath and celebrate this particular moment that we're in.
For sure, yeah. And there's a hoping for many more to come.
Yes, exactly. This may need to be a topic for our soapbox at some point. Gender inequity and the power of sex positivity and feminist communities to address that.
Yes, here.
So there's no good way that I could think of transitioning this topic to our topic.
We're gonna take it hard, right?
I was playing with the idea of being speaking of women, some of my best friends are women.
Nice segue. Nice.
But today, what we actually are talking about is friends, especially what happens when a friendship evolves into something more.
For sure. Yeah.
And so you very famously say on this podcast that you fuck your friends.
I do. I say that in this podcast, and I do fuck my friends.
You're I put my money where my mouth is.
Exactly. I say this, one, because it's fun to say, and two, because I do. And I think it's worth mentioning, so with this episode, we said we're going to kind of cover this idea of friends with benefits, right? And when I say I fuck my friends, there's actually two sides to that. And I think this kind of corresponds to what we're saying about friends with benefits. One is that I have my community, and thus my friends in my community is very sex positive. So I have some friends, longtime friends who I have sexual adventures with and have as play partners. So in that case, I have some existing friends whom I have sex with. And then other version for me, the other side for me, is that people that I have sex with, whether they end up being, short time play partners or long time partners, is that I prefer my sexual relationships to have a foundation of friendship. That is the quality of relationship I like to have with the people that I have sex with. So I think to sort of thinking about that in these two kind of way, two sides. One is friends that you have sex with, and then two is the foundation of friendship with your play partners. And I think that's kind of what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. My experience has been twofold. One, I have had friends with benefits. So I have folks who I've not had any kind of romantic partnership with, even starting from high school. I was always, and I've shared this on the podcast, I always knew that I was non-monogamous. I didn't have the language for it, but I knew from early dating age, if you will, that I always, that I was interested in multiple connections and was good at compartmentalization. Which was also really important. So I would have friends and we would mess around, and that would not, in fact, in some cases, no one knew. We were secret friends with benefits. And no one even knew in what to a case that we were even friends with each other. Like no one ever even saw us having a conversation ever, let alone knowing that there was like some benefit happening on the sidelines. But part of that was because I was really good at compartmentalization. I knew this is for this is for that, this is the context of this and that. So I've had that experience and into my adulthood. And then being friends with folks who I've been in partnership with. I mean, that's a huge thing within the lesbian community as well, is, that you fall in love quick, then there's lesbian bed death and the sexual relationship ends.
There's a U-Haul first, no?
Right, exactly. So U-hauling, for those who don't know out there, I'm going to teach you some words. So U-Haul moments are, that is the idea that lesbians want to move in with each other right away. So they fall in love, they have this emotional connection, and then immediately someone orders a U-Haul and we want to move in with each other. And then there's this other phrase around lesbian bed death, which is that the physical relationship at some point dwindles away. That hasn't been my experience necessarily consistently, but that's what I hear. And then the other thing is that when they break up, that they stay friends, that everyone is like best friends with each other. So those are some of the stories that are out there within the lesbian community. But it's often, I mean, I am friends, my partner is friends with many of her ex-partners, and I am friends with many of her ex-partners as a result. And so I have a little bit of, personal experience, but I'm really interested in your journey of how do you go from friends casually hanging out to something more happening? Because I think that in the midst of COVID now, as people are meeting less folks and are spending more time with people who are in their immediate circles, there may be a moment where like a look turns into an awkward giggle, and that awkward giggle turns into, something else, either emotionally or physically. And so let's talk a little bit about how to navigate through something like that in a way that doesn't damage the relationship.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think right now, especially given that we're still living in our quarantines with limited exposure, then you kind of have to think of these people to be more versatile and meet a bunch of needs. So I can totally see how things developing between people because you're spending more time with them. We talked about this before, how like the poly setup or the polyamorous ethos and way of being, way of living, way of loving, really translates into COVID times, and being this sort of versatile people in each other's lives, that you can be support network, a friend, and a lover, and have more than sort of one person that meets these needs or shows up for you in these ways. I would say first and foremost, choose wisely. I think choose wisely the people, the friends that you want to introduce benefits to, or sort of, take him to a sort of a slightly more intimate situation. Your bestie might not be your best option. So just because they are your best friend, they might not be the most compatible person for you. Also, these are treacherous waters, and let's just be honest. You might not want to, try these things out with your best friend whom you know and is like very, very important to you, because things don't always work out, because these are hard dynamics to navigate. So unless you have very, very clear communication and you feel you can talk about this openly, you think that if anything happens that you're going to be able to, like, the relationship is going to be able to really weather it, I would recommend to think really hard before you start anything, especially if it's your first time kind of venturing down this path. Start anything with your bestie. Yeah, your bestie might not be your best option.
So there's two things that I heard from what you're saying. One is kind of have like a checklist of criteria. Maybe we can go through that. Like you said, choose well. So like what would be the things that people should be looking for when they're choosing? Maybe that's question A. Let's start there.
First of all, if you're choosing a play partner that, that someone that you're attracted to, that if you have a spark with, also someone you feel that you can communicate with, especially if you're going down the path of like mixing relationship dynamics, someone that you feel you can really like openly talk to, and someone who you have, I would say, both an intellectual connection as well as a physical and a platonic one, right? Because you kind of want those mixtures. You want to be able to have conversations around, how you're feeling, and along the way, you want to be able to communicate with them as feelings change, which they inevitably will. I would say pick somebody that you are attracted to, obviously, and that you feel that you can maintain open, good, solid communication with. I would also say, make sure, I would say recommend that you pick somebody that you can be in integrity with, meaning that they don't have other commitments. They do, that it's within their relationship agreements, it's within your relationship agreements. You definitely don't want to add more issues into this mix. So I would sort of say those are your starting points.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because then the second thing that I heard you say was to have the conversation. That really, ideally, it's not like a drunken evening turns into makeout, turns into the morning after. That you want to have a conversation and be like, okay, are we going to do this? If we're going to do this, like, what would that look like? How are we going to make sure that we continue to talk to each other? That it sounds like having the conversation is important.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these things are hard, right? You don't want it to sound like a State of the Union, like, let's sit around and discuss what we're going to do. Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't want it to be like this very serious conversation. It can definitely be playful, but I think things start to become more difficult when people start to assume things or guess things or don't really talk about it, and there's like too much ambiguity, and you need to be able to talk about what you're doing and make sure that everyone's consenting, that everyone's on board, that everybody is like recognizes there might be some risks that you're taking within your friendship, but let's figure out how we're going to mitigate some of these risks. Talk about your previous relationships, why you're choosing this in this moment. Is this maybe a start of I think that's the important piece. Like, is this a start of a potential long-term relationship? Are you escalating, if you will, this relationship, or are you kind of maintaining the friendship and you're now starting to have sex? I think that is a distinction that everybody needs to be very clear about. And I think that's the conversation that you need to be having. Like, is this a long-term friendship now escalating into potential partners, partnership or boyfriend, girlfriend, lover situation, and let's see where it goes situation, which is very different than we've been friends, we're going to continue to be friends, and now we're going to add this one activity to the things that we do as friends. We go to the movies, we go for a run, we discuss politics, and we have sex. Which is very different than we've been friends. We know each other. I wonder what, future will be like as partners. Let's start with just like seeing what our physical connection would be like. And now we have sex. And then, with that, some expectations come into play. The relationship dynamics start to change and evolve into something else. Like, both are okay. You just have to decide, or you have to be open in open dialogue about which path you're taking.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And honestly, that sounds like a beautiful world that you just described. If we go to the movies, we go to brunch, we talk politics, and we have sex. I mean, as somebody who identifies as pansexual, who really is attracted to the person and not the gender identity, I often will think, like, at some point within my friendships, will be like, yeah, I could do that. That could happen. That could happen for me right there.
Yeah.
That is not. I'm not in the same circles as you are. So the like mommy play dates that I'm on, exactly, I don't have the same availability. And I don't think that in the times when I have been engaged in dynamics like that, I don't think I've always done it right. I certainly haven't had the conversation in advance. Reflecting back, I mean, I can think of one occasion where it really did just kind of physically escalate during like a sleepover, and some messing around happened, and I think it might have only happened that one time, because I remember the next time we connected and had another sleepover, she like suggested a particular movie to put on. And then in that movie, it was like clearly she chose that movie because there was like an intense sex scene, and then was like kind of leaning into me during the scene. And I was just like, I was not there anymore. Like I had always been like, ooh, what would that be like? And then it was, and we did. And that was it. And then I was good. That question was answered for me. And clearly she wanted to continue and engage. And so I don't know if we actually ever did talk about it. We're still friends. I don't think we ever talked about it. I just did not engage it back. Like I did not physically respond to her like leaning into me, and then it just after time, I think she just got the message that it wasn't going to happen again.
Was it awkward?
Yes, it was awkward.
I should say, was your relationship awkward? Was your friendship awkward?
I don't think so. No, because we had been such good friends up until the point, and we're still friends. So it didn't necessarily impact that. It just, those moments felt awkward because I was like waiting for it to pass, like waiting for the storm to pass, waiting for that part of, and then at some point it just never came up again. So I should have done that differently looking back. But that is, I think those are, the times that I can think of. I don't think that I've ever had the conversation.
Yeah, I think I have had the conversation in a couple of directions. For example, I mean, I've had the conversations where I've kind of said, you want to play, and went down that road. I've also had the conversation with friends who said to me, like, also because I openly say I fuck my friends. It doesn't necessarily mean that I fuck all my friends, which I think sometimes is misunderstood. And I've definitely had to turn down friends whom are within my community, whom I'm like, you're my friend, I love you. I'm just not physically attracted to you. Like, I just friendship. This is what I'm saying. Not every friendship is available for physical connection. I mean, at least for me, that's what I hear and see around me. So I've definitely been in that situation where I'm like, I see why you would think this is a good idea. Like, intellectually, I get it. I just don't have a physical attraction to you. Those are awkward conversations.
I was gonna say, was that awkward? Yeah.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I definitely remember 2 of these occasions. Well, it's as you said, it's a little easier for me because it's within my community, or especially the people that I have that kind of relationship with. They tend to be people who metabolize rejection really well. That it is just a part of the way the cookie crumbles, and it is a way that the more you ask for consent, the more chances you're going to be rejected. So the more you get into a habit of it, especially if if you go to play parties, or if you're regularly having play partners, or you're approaching people and you're like good with consent, that you're going to get a lot of no's. And I think after a while, and I talk about this in the play party etiquette workshop, that's a good thing. Like, being able to metabolize rejection is a good thing. The more you hear no, the more your nervous system realizes the world isn't ending, the better you're going to be in the process. Like, the better you're going to be, like, easier going to be to ask next time, So I'm just fortunate that I'm around people who are like, they ask bravely, and then when you put it nicely, you're like nicely like, I get it, but I don't, like, I'm not game for that. They kind of metabolize it. And also I think there's some compartmentalization that happens also, like, oh yeah, this thing happened, and my friendships are still my friendships.
All right, so I want to ask about the ask. Like, so I'm going to paint the picture. I'm going to paint the scene. So you are somewhere, you're sitting, maybe you're play party makes it too easy because people are there to engage in that way. So I'm going to take it out of the play party context. You and a friend are hanging out. You went out this is post-COVID, but masked and appropriately distanced. And you're spending time together. How would you either put out the ask, or maybe what's the best way you have been asked?
I'm trying to think of situation where it wasn't easy, because most of the time it was easy, meaning like you said, play parties make it easy, but it's also people within my community are just used to asking, like, do you want to go on a play date? Is always a fun way to start. That's like kind of what I would, by the time I'm approaching somebody, I'm never 100% sure, but that's what I would say. Do you want to go on a play date? And then they'll be like, either the answer is like, yay, let's do it, or a play date? What is that? And then you're like, let me tell you what I have in mind. And then you kind of like make up something whatever you have in mind, right? So let's go and get some cocktails. If I was in New York, let's go to find a rooftop with a good view. Let's get some cocktails, and then like whatever I might have in mind, and find somewhere cozy when I come back to mine. This is what I mean. There's often alcohol involved, but the conversation is during the date. There's alcohol involved, but during the conversation isn't, right? That's kind of what I always tell about sex as well. Like, intoxication during sex is fun. Like, let's not be coy about it. I just think that the conversation needs to be sober. Yes. And then when you're in it, then you kind of, you don't want to be delirious out of your mind and unable to keep consent. But I think it's unrealistic to say you should be sober at all times when you're having sex. So that's not what I'm suggesting. But, I think that's how I would approach it. Like, do you want to go on a play date? And then either the person knows what that means and they're like, yay, or they're like, what is that? And you're like, oh, let me tell you what I have in mind. That's how I would approach it. Also, if it happens, if I stumble into it, personally, I name it. Like, if I stumble into it, if someone's leaning into me, like your friend who suggests, like your friend from your story, I would just name it. I would say, oh, I feel like you're getting cozy. What do you have in mind? Like, that's my favorite line. What do you have in mind? Or in your situation, I would say, oh, I know we had fun last time, right? I feel like we might be going down that same path, So those are kind of like naming things, being playful. It's a skill. I think playful communication is a skill. It's something that you need to learn and practice. Like it doesn't come easily, especially these topics because they're awkward. They tend to be awkward because our society, our culture makes it awkward already. Like the topic is like a hush stigma. So you already got like, it's already like feels like heavy. And then you're dealing with it in a dynamic that you might not feel like you're introducing it to an existing dynamic. So it's already difficult. So it just takes like courage and a bit of like skill, you know, you have to like know your lines and be willing to ask open questions and be willing to share first. Like, this is what I have in mind. Like, put yourself out there. Like, how does that sound? Or what would your version be? You know, like, and then you have to put the information out there first and then like solicit a response.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it became much easier to talk about sex once I had some language to use. I think in the beginning, like saying like, I want to be intimate sounded weird and clunky, I think. And even with like a partner, like when I was like hoping for that. And so I would start to say, in the beginning, I would say connection. Like I'd love to connect. I'd love to connect. And I meant, I want to physically be intimate, sexually intimate. And they were like, yeah, let's like connect it. Let's talk tonight. Let's watch TV and hang out. So that as we were connecting based on their description, and not connecting based on mine, I would increasingly get frustrated. And at some point I was like, I said I wanted to connect. And they're like, we are connecting. What do you mean? And finally I'd be like, sex. I mean sex. And like at that point, then it's like not interesting. Nobody wants to do it anymore. So once I introduced play as a word, like I'd like to play later, or cozy and being like, so that that's another word that we use, or cuddly. Like once I started to use those languages, then I could talk about it and it felt less like me just shouting sex at them.
which at some point is just not sexy. I hear you. I hear you. Yeah. No, this is what I mean. And I think it's, I think some of the conversations we have on this podcast is to give people language. And, you know, we always talk about inspiration and permission.
Play, cozy, comfy, cuddly. Let's use any of those words. I think one of the things that I've realized where I have actually had the conversation with friends is not when we've moved to physical intimacy, when it feels like there's a deeper level of emotional intimacy. So there have been a few times where it feels like, because, and it becomes complicated, right? Because friendships involve vulnerability and emotional intimacy and sharing of secrets and, you know, telling who you are and spending time. And sometimes there is, I don't know where that line is. I think it's really personal, but it can feel like the line is crossing to more emotional depth, where it feels like there is, for me at least, there was some accountability, unnamed accountability around saying good morning or good night, or checking in with the person every day, or when something big happened in your life that you wanted to talk to that person in a way that feels different than just a friendship. Or maybe there was some either flirtatious energy or physical touch that's not necessarily sexual, but it just starts to like creep into a shift from being just friends to feeling like something more, but it's not a relationship and you're not sexual. And like, what is this gray area? And does it have a name? In those moments, I've had a few of those where I've had conversations to kind of name it and be like, okay, what is this? What's going on? Is this, again, within my relationship agreements currently? Like, you know, can I have this kind of emotional relationship with somebody? So that's been my experience. I'm interested if you've experienced that, if you've crossed over into those emotional closeness.
This is what I mean. Inevitably, feelings will change. Like once you introduce sex into a relationship, it will change. Maybe temporarily. It doesn't have to change forever, but it will change temporarily. One of the things that I would actually recommend is like, if you start having sex with your friends, make sure that you also remember to be friends with your friends. Like do the things that you were doing as friends and don't fall into a sex hole and like, you know, that's all you do with one another, because I think that's, you know, like the reason why you're having sex with them is because of their because of your friendship relationship in the first place. So like keep that up. Don't like forget that. Don't forget that you're friends, and keep reestablishing the friendship dynamic and all the things that friends do. And I think what you're describing is when we forget that we were friends and we fall into the intimacy hole and sort of expectations grow out of there, and, you know, and we don't manage those expectations and feelings go out of there, and we don't manage and communicate the feelings, and, you know, and we forget that we were friends in the first place, and then things sort of start to decline from there. I would say, you know, make sure you're friends, and be clear about what that is. Be clear about what is it that makes a friend of, a friend a friend? What are your expectations from that relationship? What are your, maybe you don't have any expectations, and that's what makes it a friendship. What are the feelings that you associate with friendship, right? Like you said, it can get gray very quickly. If you were to name them, with my friends, I'd like to have trust and integrity and, feel accepted and loved and seen and heard. Like those are all the things that you would say to describe an ideal partner or partners, So you have to be very clear along the way, or risk like not being clear and whatever that happens. For some people, they might not feel like, oh, they have to name it all the time. And then at that point you're like, well, you kind of have to then like see how the cookie crumbles.
That makes sense. That makes sense. 'Cause I'm thinking about those who are in like the asexual community, the aromantic. Thank you.
Aromantic.
I'm thinking about our conversation where we were saying aromatic.
Aromatic. So. No. I think we should totally keep this in there because when you do see aromantic written out, it does look like aromatic. And it took me a while to find. So it took me a while to figure out why we're talking about aromatic people in the context of sexuality. I had to do some research, and I thought it was a kink.
Well, we should talk about that and poly versus polyum at some point. We need to also address that.
I can definitely get on the soapbox about that.
But those who are in the aromantic and the asexual community who, when there is not sexual intimacy involved in the relationship, it can feel like potentially from the outside that those are just friendships, and really understanding that just because a relationship does not involve sexual intimacy, it does not mean that then that is just a friendship. And so I think that's why I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be emotionally connected to someone who is not your friend, and how do you define that relationship. But what I hear you saying makes sense, that I think there is no external prescriptor to that the people in the relationship are going to define that is a relationship.
Exactly. And we're going to go back, we essentially go back to this idea of relationship by design, right? You design your relationships and not necessarily just your romantic relationships, but ideally all your relationships. So you're intentional about all those relationships, and you're clear, and everybody's clear. The feelings are clear, and expectations are clear, and there's good communication. As you design your relationships, as you custom design your relationships, then you can say like, okay, this relationship is about friendship and sexual exploration. And this relationship is about sexual exploration and romance. This relationship is about friendship and romance and no sex, right? So this is the whole relationship by design model, where you get to decide what the relationships are about, and how you get to show up in them, and how other people get to show up in them.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And to your point, it'll also evolve. I think in the beginning of my relationship with my wife, there was a lot of sexual chemistry and energy, and that's not really a part of our relationship right now. And it doesn't make it any less of a relationship that there's not sexual intimacy that's incorporated into our dynamic. It really, the emotional connection that we have has created a sense of loyalty and connection, and we have integrity around those things. So I guess it's a choose your own adventure. I think the friends with benefits summary is like, just communicate with each other.
Yeah.
It's like, it goes back to everything. I think every podcast just ends with know what you want, know yourself, be able to communicate what you want to other people, be mindful of what they want, get consent. But it sounds like what we've also shared out is find some language that feels really comfortable for you, that doesn't make it feel awkward. If you get a no, if you are told no, if you're the one saying no, that's okay. We're going to learn how to build our muscle for being told no.
Say more no's. That's going to be my new hashtag.
It's true. No, you're right about that. And if you hear no, hopefully that the relationship can be maintained. That essentially, I think that if it's done well, if it's done respectfully, if it's done with some humor, some fun, with kindness, then a relationship should be able to rebound a friendship if there's a no. And if there's not a no, then have fun.
Be safe.
Be safe. Have you had a situation where you there was play and then that was it? You're like, we're good now. We don't need to play anymore. And we're just friends again.
Yeah.
Without sexual intimacy.
Yes, I've definitely been in situations where I've been friends with somebody and I've got to know them, and then like I've gotten to know them, and then I also wanted to get to know them in the sexual realm, and then I got to know them, then I'm like, okay, now I know that part of them, and I'm now like as an activity that I do with them, and that it was, it was good but not the best, and that's okay too. And it was just really for me another side of someone that I wanted to get to know, which again, it comes up for me because like, this topic is also my area of curiosity, right? So I am interested in people's sexuality and their sexual expression. So sometimes for me, it's just following my curiosity and getting to know that person, especially in that realm. And then when I do get to know them, I'm like, great, I know that now. The other thing that I want to add in there is the type of sex that you might want to decide with your certain friends. I definitely have that. I have friends whom I have sex with that at the end of our like play session, we kind of high five and like, because it's just like it's like we have a great time, and we it just ends with like, whoa, that was awesome, high five, like there's that. I have friends with whom I want to try things. They're like my safe people that I want to like try new things, because one, I've known them for a long time. Two, I trust their skills and knowledge base, and if I want to try something a little risky or something, I want to experience something new, they're kind of like almost like my sexual collaborators. So I have like that, like friends who are like that. I think when you think of friends with benefits, at least when I think of like fucking my friends, they also like they're different experiences. I have friends where it feels very like intimate, and there's like pillow talk, and there's like, it feels very romantic, and we kind of fall into this like sometimes these like weekends where we like just get lost in ourselves, and then it feels very romantic, very intimate. From the outside it might look like we're like lovers, full on romantic lovers, and then we kind of like rise out of out of the bed 2 days later, and like have a shower, hug it out, and like get coffee and like get on with our day, and there's no hard feelings, even though we've just like shared intimate space. We're just used to that shift. Like we're used to like, oh, I can just like revel in this for for the weekend, for the day, whatever we've agreed on, and then we can like get out of that and be friends and just like text when we want to, and grab coffee, and like that we're used to that transition, and we have a solid enough foundation of friendship that we can step out, and then it's like solid, so just like think through, as things are developing with your friends, if you're going into these intimate spaces, if you're going sexual exploration spaces, like just be mindful and aware of like what is happening to the relationship, and like what type of sex you want to have, and like how is it going, and where are the feelings happening. It's okay if feelings are developing. Like, no, don't like run away if you thought you were going to be just friends, and then like feelings develop. Like, it's inevitable, they will. You just have to decide what you want to do with those feelings, and be communicate as much as you can.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think this is a good message for those who either have friends that they are interested in exploring more with, or interested actually in making new friends that they can have sex with too. Like specifically building friendships with people who there's an open door for consensual play or emotional connection.
Yeah.
I like it. And people should report back if you're going to use play or cozy or cuddly or any of these words, and your ask goes well, please report back and let us know.
I actually had someone straight up tell me, "I'm horny. What about you?" I was like, that worked.
Did it work? You're like, all right, sure.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, kinda, that opened the door. Just whatever works for you. Just find your words. Find the words that work for you.
Exactly. I love it. So we have added a new segment to our podcast called Soapbox Moments, where, because there are things that just piss us off and we don't have enough spaces to name all the things that piss us off, we thought this is our podcast. So we get to choose a place in our podcast to talk about the things that make us mad. And I have a soapbox moment today. So I have defined myself in the past as pansexual, which essentially means that I am not necessarily attracted to a particular gender. And every time that I introduced myself as that, when it was appropriate, I wasn't like, at work and saying, my name is Jackie and I'm pansexual. Though some of my jobs, that's completely appropriate.
I was gonna say, yeah.
It's true. But when I did, people would challenge that and say, okay, so does that mean that like all people, like trans folk, trans men and trans women? What about like pre-op? And that kind of explanation does not exist anywhere else, right? When I first was like I was bi, people weren't saying, "Oh, well, okay, but like femme identifying folks and masculine of center folks, or like cisgender and like." There's not that kind of investigation. I don't know why I need to explain myself. Number one. Number two, I actually like the idea of pansexuality because I then don't have to define myself because it means that it is about the person and not their gender identity. But I actually got that question so many times that I've stopped saying it and now just identify as queer because people ask me far less questions about it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I have issues with pansexual.
Okay.
The word, not pansexuals, by no means. In fact, that is not a soapbox moment. In fact, my sexuality presents as somebody who calls themselves pansexual, but as you can see, the way that I went about it is that I don't like to use that word for myself. Mm-hmm. And when I hear it, I can't. This is so unpopular. I'm saying this and I feel like I'm going to get burnt at the stake, but I just kind of find it annoying. I don't know why when people say they're pansexuals, I find it annoying. I don't know why. I couldn't tell you. It's not their expression. That's not like, it's not what they mean by being pans, like not the way that you explained it, which is, I don't like gender doesn't affect my attraction to somebody. Mm-hmm. That I totally get. I just something about pansexual, the word, and maybe the people who use the word. Oh. I find that to be irritating to me, and I couldn't tell you why.
Is it because it's like trendy now to not the gender is not a thing or pronouns?
Yeah. I do think that it's actually to do with my feed. It's just, my community, my immediate people that I hang out with, whatever the algorithm chooses to show me because of my activity online. So my noise is filled with people who say they're pansexual, and it's like it's all I hear, and it just feels like a trend that everyone's on this bandwagon of being pansexual, and it's a big deal. And a lot of the time I'm hearing it because people are trying to be an individual, but by saying that they're pansexual, they're actually just as the next person who's saying it, and I'm not even convinced if they really mean it or if they even really understand it, and it's just something that comes up all the time, and it's just annoying, and I'm so sorry that it's annoying.
Maybe this is why people, when I would say it, would be like, are you sure? Is that really? Oh, wait, so what about this person and that person? Maybe they were, because that is not my feed. There's no one on my feed. You and I have different, like we're in the same, we're like a Venn diagram. There are circles that are the same, and then we have other circles that are wildly different. And mine are like motivational quotes, memes about like being a mom, like, like self-empowerment stuff. There's not a lot of pansexual.
My feed is filled with pansexuals, like pansexual, and like sexual expressions, and including pansexual people being non-binary, pronouns, and all the weird and wonderful ways people go about not saying men and women. Again, I'm gonna get burned at the stake, but anywhere from vulva owner and penis owner to the most recent thing that I read, I'm sorry, this is not another soapbox moment. They were it was uterus owner and prostate owner. I'm like, honestly, I'm not okay with that. I'm just not okay with that. We've not like the whole idea is not, we're not reducing people down to like organs, and now we've just changed. We've just picked other organs to reduce people down to. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I was saying this the other day. My mom had a hysterectomy and my dad had a prostatectomy. So neither of them have a womb or a prostate. So what are we calling them now? Well, they're not men and women. Like, again, I'm I understand we're trying to be inclusive. I understand there are people who don't identify as one or the other gender. I get it. But to accommodate them, we can't be reducing people down to, organs or like, it's just not going to stick. It's going to alienate the mainstream folk. It's just going to make people who identify as non-binary inaccessible to your average person who doesn't understand gender politics, who doesn't understand social justice in a way that we do, who doesn't understand identity politics. Like, it's just going to make these people othered in a worst possible way, rather than keeping things simple, accessible, so that it just normalizes. And calling people vulva owners and penis owners and uterus owners and prostate owners is not a path to that. This might be the end of our podcast.
I was letting that like hang in the air for a minute. I was processing it. Yeah, I mean, if there are ways in which you like to be identified, let us know. If pansexuality is one way, we will call you that. Effy and I, can we make the agreement? If someone wants to be called, including myself, we will call you that. But for me right now, I can't do it. Too many questions. I'm just exhausted by people. And so I'm going to say queer. If you want to know more than that, then you can have a conversation with me and we can talk more. Great. That's my soapbox moment. So we have been getting so many amazing words of encouragement and thanks from people in our DMs about the podcast. And it just, it lights us up. It motivates us. And we are incredibly appreciative because at some point it just feels like you and I are just like talking. Literally we're just looking at each other and talking into mics. That's what's happening right now. And sometimes it's funny to realize like, oh, someone's listening to this. My sister texted me this morning and was like, I love the recent episode. And I was like, oh yeah, she can hear things that I'm saying out loud.
Yeah.
And so please keep doing that. Please keep sending us messages because it really does, this is in some ways it's a community medium, but in other ways it's a lonely medium because Effy and I are just talking to each other at the moment or to our guests. But if you are going so far as to DM us and share your thoughts, which we love to do, please go the extra step and click like or follow or share this episode or any of our episodes with somebody else because it does make a difference. We are working to track our numbers to really understand what's the content that you're drawn to so that we can do some more of that. So we're excited about it and we hope that you like and share with us. You can also find us everywhere by going to We Are Curious Foxes. You can go to our website. You can go to Instagram. You can go to Facebook and join the conversation that's happening in our Facebook group. You can join our Patreon. Via Patreon, you are going to get some special content, some special podcasts that are made just for our patrons. You'll get an opportunity to ask questions for our guests on our Patreon. There are going to be some special events that are happening. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the Patreon world. You should go take a look. And if you have any thoughts around what we should be talking about and you want your voice heard, because again, your words matter, then we ask you to shoot us an email at listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com. And then finally, we're going to be doing a show on family. Specifically, how do you raise children within a polyamorous or open dynamic? How do you have sex positive and affirming conversations with your child? So if you have questions or stories around this topic, then give us a call, leave a message or leave your question or story. And you can do that by calling us at 201-870-0063.
This episode is produced and edited by the immensely talented Nina Pollock. Our intro music is composed by Dave Saha. We're grateful for their work, and we thank you for listening. And as always, stay curious, friends. Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.